Let's give a huge homecoming welcome to our fellow Kentuckian, Ashley Judd.
Hi, y'all. How about ya? I am so glad to be here, and thank you so much for spending such a stunningly gorgeous Kentucky autumn day with us to talk about the change we need. My husband and I drove up here today, and of course, as soon as we cross the line into the Commonwealth, my little Eastern Kentucky heart starts to pitter-patter. I do love coming home, and thank you for that wonderful welcome. And thank you to Jennifer for asking me to be a part of this tremendously important event. Now, I've been told that I'm preaching to the choir. We all bleed blue, right? Well, we're here to talk not just about our favorite blue, but we're here to talk about turning Kentucky true blue for Joe Biden and Barack Obama, because this is the election of a lifetime. When I started at the University of Kentucky in 1986, that university's administration was just beginning to have a conversation about divesting from the obscenity that was the apartheid government in South Africa. And there was a tremendous woman who was like a second mother to me, Barbara. She was a cook at the Kappa House, and she was a woman of color. And we would sit and talk about how she and her sisters wouldn't send their children to UK because that university still made money off of the oppression of black people in South Africa. And they were sending their kids to Eastern and other colleges. And I became so involved in the social justice and human rights movement as a result of those conversations with Barbara. So at my very first semester at UK, the die was cast, and I became a rabble-rouser. I joined every single student organization, and I was increasingly shocked and appalled when I learned about my government, my tax dollars, funding death squads throughout Central America. So I really came of age politically and grew up in that moment by being sensitized about all what we were doing wrong. And it was easy at that time to lose sight of what we were doing right. I wanted to join the Peace Corps, and instead I went to a different kind of jungle, Hollywood. And as I made my way and created a career for myself, I wasn't doing a lot of social justice and human rights work, but I hadn't forgotten about it in my heart. I would still go to Planned Parenthood, different locations around the country. Even when I was taking a road trip, my girlfriends and I would say, hey, let's see if there's a Planned Parenthood in Kansas where we can stop and see if some women need access to reproductive services that are being denied them. But when it came time for elections, I was always really active, especially in 2004. I went down to Florida and did what was called the Women on the Move bus tour in support of Senator Kennedy. And when that election didn't go our way, I was in bed flat on my back for 3 days. I was devastated. Well, they're playing here at this theater when we're not here rabble-rousing for the right reasons, a play called Night of the Living Dead. That's what it's going to be Wednesday morning if we don't turn this sucker out for Barack Obama. I was just campaigning in North Carolina with Valerie Biden, Joe's sister, and she mentioned something about how when she was a little girl and he was doing something wonderful and she was still so small that she was still under the kitchen table sucking her thumb. I was like, I'm headed right back there if this thing don't go our way. So let me tell you a little bit about how I got involved with this particular campaign and why Barack Obama is my candidate. Because I went your way in the primaries. And before I went your way in the primaries, I was actually going John Edwards' way. So I'm not one of those who immediately thought that Obama was my guy. I chose to go to Denver, however, with an open mind. And there's a woman in my life, I call her my grandmother of choice. So I want to be clear about that because a lot of y'all know my Nana over in Boyd County. Don't want to confuse my Nana and my grandmother of choice, who I call Menny. So my Menny and I went to Denver together, and she said, Ashley, there is one principle that is a bar to all growth. This is a little bit of an intellectual concept, so study it. She said that principle is contempt prior to investigation. And that if I could get the willingness on board to abandon my contempt prior to investigation, I might actually learn some really wonderful stuff about Barack Obama. And so I did go with an open mind. And by Thursday night, and I mean this seriously, my life had changed. That week changed my life. To be in that open air stadium with 84,000 of my fellow Americans, all of whom had to do community service in order to earn their seat, and to watch a man of color walk out on that stage and accept a major party's nomination for president, something healed in me that I hadn't even known was scarred. And many sat there beside me holding my hand and crying. She told me that as a child in West Texas, she worked at a movie theater where she was instructed to show the black folk upstairs to where they had to sit. And if, God forbid, they needed to go to the bathroom, she was to show them out the door, down the street, and across the way where the coloreds had to go. And she quit that job rather than do that to them and to herself. And then Barack Obama walked to that podium, and as good as it already was, my gosh, he opened his mouth. And he began to talk about America as it is and America as it should be. And I pretty much cried the entire time. You might have even thought with me jumping up and down that whole night that I was in the student section at Rep Arena. It was one of the most exciting things that has ever happened to me, Indianapolis 500 included. As you all know, because you're here, the current administration, or regime, as some of us like to more honestly call it, has done nothing but try again and again to use failed policies. Senator McCain has voted with President Bush 90% of the time. He needs to look at a dictionary because that is not what a maverick is. And when I think about what our people need, it's not more of the same. In fact, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the very definition of insanity. We need change. And with that change, we also need unity. I was so impressed when I read The Audacity of Hope, and I learned that the first thing that State Senator Barack Obama did was bring together traditionally antagonistic groups, the police and civil rights advocates, and create new policies that would allow folks who were being charged with capital crimes to have their interrogations videotaped. This would help prevent the execution of people who were innocent, because Barack Obama was appalled that 13 people had been put to death in Illinois who, after their execution, had been found innocent. This should not happen anywhere, much less in the United States of America. And so Barack Obama brought these groups together who traditionally don't like one another very much, and they came to an agreement that helps protect the innocent and vindicate them, and also helps convict the guilty. Cooperation, unity. I was also very impressed to learn that when our Congress would not pass health care for children, he went home to Illinois and personally expanded health insurance coverage for women and children. He has done so much that I think speaks to his character and the principles that he will bring to the White House. Now, I have my phone with me because a friend and I were texting. She's in upstate New York, and we like to talk politics. And so I'm going to jump all over the place because I have a couple of different things I want to highlight. You know, when Senator McCain made his choice for a running mate, or had his arm twisted, or however that went down, one of the things he said about Governor Palin was that she was a maverick. And he said that she as evidence of this, sold an airplane that was a financial burden to the state of Alaska and was an unnecessary, expenditure, that she sold it on eBay for a profit. And oh, just doesn't that make a cute, charming story? If only it were true. The plane didn't sell on eBay. In fact, she had to take it off eBay. Then she sold it for a $600,000 loss to the taxpayers of Alaska. And now the owner of this plane is charging the state for $50,000 in maintenance. Maverick, liar, you tell me. The other thing that really gets my goat about all of this. Now, I said prayers before I came out on stage to be positive. It's hard. Okay, I don't understand the way some of these quote-unquote values match up. A woman who is a victim of sexual assault and rape in the town of Wasilla is charged at the police department for her rape kit. Do we really want someone with those kinds of values a heartbeat away from the presidency of the United States? I mean, I actually shake when I think of that. Now, Senator Obama on that great night in Denver talked about the many social issues that do divide us, including abortion. And because it is his innate, empathic nature to reach out to those with whom he differs, he said, if we cannot agree on whether or not a woman has the right of privacy to decide in her own conscience, with a conversation with her healthcare provider, in a dialogue with the God of her understanding, whether or not she can terminate that pregnancy, can we at least not agree that it is our overriding objective to prevent unintended pregnancy? And what so many Americans unfortunately do not know, because of the razzle-dazzle and the smoke and mirrors, is that this Republican ticket is outright hostile to birth control. They oppose it. And I like to think that they represent an extremist view of our Republican brothers and sisters. But an extremist view doesn't belong in the White House. We are an enormous country with an incredibly diverse population. We may not agree, as I said, on some of these more divisive issues, but we have to come together in such a way that serves and protects our people. What young sexually active folk don't know hurts them. A child who is becoming sexually active needs to know medically accurate sex education so that he and she can make decisions that protect and empower their health. As soon as a teenager has one pregnancy, boom, that sets her up for life, to have a series of unintended pregnancies. These interventions must start in an appropriate age and an appropriate way. And I don't know what to say when I hear them say that a woman who is a victim of rape or a child who is the victim of incest should be criminalized for trying to terminate that pregnancy. I don't know what to say to that, except not on my watch. And not only would they criminalize someone who's already been victimized, they would criminalize the healthcare providers who seek to offer compassionate assistance to those ravaged individuals. I want to talk a little bit about poverty because it bugs me. John McCain has 7 houses. My husband and I have been talking about this the whole ride up here. Bono has 2, by the way. He's probably a little more rich than McCain, but clearly more sensible. He only has 2. And Dario was saying to me that he wasn't so sure that that actually was revealing about McCain's character or his values, whereas I assert that a person with 7 houses is not really in touch with what it means to be poor in the United States of America. That a person with 7 houses doesn't necessarily have a tax plan in mind for the mama who does her own dental work because she can't afford dental care. For the mama who sits at her table knowing she is serving food that is nearly expired because it was all she could afford to buy. He doesn't understand the mama who sells, this really kills me, her great-grandmother's china for $50 because otherwise she can't feed her kids. He wants to give tax cuts to Fortune 500 companies, to gas and oil companies, to the banks that have already entirely failed and corrupted our economy. Whereas Barack Obama, on day one, wants to put $500 back in the pocket of every member of the working and the middle class, $1,000 back in the pockets of the middle and working class families. And what I love so much about Senator Obama's proposals is that he has a full basket, a complementary and holistic approach to solving our problems, because none of these issues exists in a vacuum. Taxes, mortgage foreclosure moratoriums, health care, understanding that when people go back to work, they might need assistance with their transportation because they might not have a way to get to work. Or folks who are working 2 and 3 jobs or who are single parents, they might need help with licensed, safe, responsible daycare for their children. Understanding that an investment in Head Start and early Head Start is directly proportional to what we pay if we don't invest in Head Start and early Head Start. In penitentiaries, that truancy plummets when children have appropriate Head Start. These things are so sensible. I just don't think our opponents are sensible. I love what Senator Biden has done with regard to bringing out into the open the dirty little secret known as domestic violence. Of his many accomplishments in Congress, including his foreign policy expertise, he says he is most proud of his Violence Against Women Act, passed in 1994, and the state-of-the-art national hotline that he implemented has just received its 2 millionth call. That's a vice president with values I can support. I wanted to tell you just briefly that I'd like to ask for your prayers for a young Kentuckian named Allison Gardner. Allison is an employee of the United States government. In particular, she is employed by the United States Agency for International Development, and she is posted in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo. I met her there this May. She's a terrific young woman, and she is working in particular with victims of civil strife and violent rape in the eastern part of the DRC. A real hellhole called Goma, which is absolutely collapsing as I speak with you now. I'm sure that Allison herself is quite safe and that the United States government is looking out for her in a way that's appropriate. But she's an example of a fine Kentuckian who understands that it's not just what happens within our borders. It is what happens abroad as well that matters. And I am so looking forward to electing an administration, including our Democratic ticket to Washington, so that we can have good cooperation between both the bicameral, between the House and the Senate, as well as the executive branch, so that we can get away from this strong arm bullying, make the world think we're right, and go back to showing the world that America is good. We need to bring our men and women home from Iraq in a responsible way, and when they get home, treat them with the dignity and respect that they have earned. I think one of the most exciting things I heard about Senator Obama is he has zero tolerance for homelessness amongst our veterans, that he wants to modernize the VA so that information and data is shared instantaneously wherever they are in the country. Their records are accessed and they get the critical medical services they need. That he wants to destigmatize mental illness amongst our veterans, including post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome. He will negotiate in a way that is diplomatic and strong with our enemies, and he will rebuild our alliances and invest in the multilateral institutions that help America not have to shoulder this burden alone. I've done a lot of development work around the world. I've been to 12 countries now. And you know, when I sit in a brothel or in a slum or in a rural health clinic that by this country's standards should be a condemned building, and I'm with kids who don't have access to the basic health services that you and I mostly take for granted, I think, what's the difference between these kids and our almost 50 million Americans who don't have health insurance? There's so much that's gone wrong. And this Tuesday, you and I are going to make it go right. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about what all I've been doing, and I'd like to invite you to join me in it. You may not be able to travel. I've been to North Carolina, I've been to Missouri, and now, of course, I'm here today. But I've also done MoveOn.org house parties. I get emails from people in my community who I don't necessarily know. I get a dessert, and I go to their house with my cell phone and the charger, and I sit down and I make calls to undecided voters in swing states. Hi, this is Ashley Judd. Yeah, for real, for real. Okay, what kind of, sure, I can sign that. What's your address? Okay, not a problem. Okay, no, actually that's never happened because people just want to talk about the election. They really do. And it's a little hard at first to make a cold call to a stranger, but I think that in these battleground states like Indiana and in Missouri and in North Carolina, they know that the world is watching. And so they're kind of not surprised when Ashley Judd calls them to talk about Tuesday. And I was just in Canada, and people were literally saying to me, we are riveted. The entire world is waiting to see how this thing turns out on Tuesday. Please make your country do the right thing. And they care so much about the environment in Canada. Okay, here's like my whole other thing, the aerial killing of wolves and the polar bears. You familiar with this? The great spiritual leader, Gandhi, said, you can tell everything you need to know about a society by the way it treats its animals. Everything I need to know about Sarah Palin right there. Thank you very much. So when you go home, go to Barack Obama, your Kentucky website. You have one local just for you, and see what you can do to make phone calls to out-of-state undecided voters. As I said, it's kind of hard, that first one, but it gets easier. And when you get hung up on, just say, well, they're a beautiful, precious child of God, and keep on going. The first time I got hung up on, I called back and I said, did something just go wrong with the phone? Actually, people really are very civil. And you can also go to MoveOn.org and find out from them what kind of help Barack and Joe need. Of course, it's all about turnout in Jefferson County on Tuesday. You know, gather up your neighbors, gather up your family and your friends. As the mayor said, don't make this a woulda, shoulda, coulda. We need to get the deal done. So that's really all I have to say, as if that wasn't enough. As you can tell, I'm slightly emotionally invested in this. And I thank you so much for your always very kind and warm welcome. And I'm, again, very delighted to have had the opportunity to visit with you today. And without further ado, I would like to introduce to you your very own governor and your very own First Lady, Jane and Steve Beshear.
For grace, it's a beautiful day. Sky falls, you feel like
Thank you. Thank you all.